Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the web Oneida Herkimer Madison BOCES for our Checkpoint A examination changes to our format. My name is Lucille Matt, and at this point, I would like to introduce you to our panelists. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Lou, you're muted. Panelists need to unmute themselves, please.
Okay. Buenas noches. My name is Louis Baskinger. I am a retired Spanish teacher from New Hartford Central School District. And tonight I am speaking to you from very close to the Plaza Mayor in Madrid. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Dana?
My name is Dana Gaska. I am the World Languages Program Specialist here at OHM BOCES. I taught Mandarin Chinese for 15 years with the interactive video course program here at BOCES. And I'm the team leader for the Chinese exams.
And I have our director, Greg Smith.
Welcome, everyone. I've overseen the world language programs here at OHM BOCES for about 6 or 7 years now. And I think the first year of which was the year we got approved as a 4+1 pathways provider for our Checkpoint B exam. But the program's grown a great deal and in a large part due to all the participation of the districts that are attending today. So thank you all for being here with us. People here not only are core to the creation of the exams format, but are integral in the exams creation every year. So great work by them, and you're in good hands.
And Roger Ratton.
Hi, everyone. This is Roger. I am going to be watching the question board, and I help with ASL.
And once again, my name is Lucille Matt, and I work with OHM BOCES for many, many years now. I am a retired French teacher from the Whitesboro Central School District, and here I am a team leader, a world language consultant, and I work on the French exam, the ASL exam with Roger, and the Chinese exam with Dana. So we have a very busy schedule today, so we're going to just keep on going as quickly as we can to cover everything that we want as efficiently as we would like. The first thing we would like you to do today is we have an introduction poll. It should take you not more than maybe 40 seconds to actually do. So Dana's loading this for you now. And if you would just fill in that information for us, there are multiple choice questions, as you can see. I'll give you about a minute. We're going to talk now. I'm going to turn this over to Dana, who's going to tell you about our resource document page. Dana, if you want to start that, and I will stop sharing mine and you can share yours.
Sure. I just put it in the chat for everybody. This is just a small page full of resources relating to documents that we're going to be talking about during the webinar. So we have the New York State Learning Standards, the Principles and Guidelines, and if you scroll down, you'll be able to find our format documents as well as the sample prompts that we will be looking at today.
So let me go back to the original agenda for the day. We have an overview of our process, what got us from point A to point B, our description of our format for Checkpoint A for multiple languages. We have some task exemplars for you today. We also have our requesting feedback on our draft rubrics that you will also see in draft form today. And then, of course, our Q&A. So I'm going to move right on at this point in time. And I'm going to turn this over at this point to Dana.
Okay, so I'm just going to do a very brief overview of the process. So here you can see a chart that shows the implementation timeline of the revised New York State Learning Standards for World Languages. These standards first went into effect during the 2023-2024 school year. And the first Checkpoint A exam using these new standards will be in June of this year, 2020, or next year, 2025. The state is currently in the drafting process for the guidelines for Checkpoint B. And the first exam using the new standards for Checkpoint B will be in 2027. Okay, Lucille, next slide, please. Okay, so just a brief summary. In 2021, New York State released the revised learning standards for world languages. These standards more closely align with the ACTFL World Readiness Standards for learning languages. Along with these new standards, we have a revised set of themes and topics. So there are 3 overarching themes and 13 topics that are covered at the Checkpoint A level. In the spring of 2024, the state released the principles and guidelines for adoption of Checkpoint A benchmark assessments, which we are following very closely in the creation of our Checkpoint A exams. So the first iteration, like I mentioned before, of the Checkpoint A exams using these new standards will be in 2025, with Checkpoint B following shortly after in 2027. Speaking about the format, the criteria of the exam, there are certain things that we must adhere to in the creation of these exams. So number 1, we have to use authentic resources for all interpretive sections of the examination. So for modern languages, this is going to be part 2, interpretive listening, and part 3, interpretive reading. And for American Sign Language, part 3, interpretive receiving, we'll use authentic resources. And Lucille will talk more about this when we get to the individual sections of those exams. Our exams must also reflect the 3 modes of communication. So we have interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational modes. And we must also follow certain weight percentage guides that were released by the state, and I will get to those shortly. Or what must be deleted from the exams, what we cannot include. So the first thing is the email response. Previous exams, we had a question where students would read an email in the target language, and then they would respond to this email in the target language. We're no longer going to have these kinds of questions on the exam because we cannot have read to write activities. And this is mostly because read to write activities are assessing 2 different modes of communication at the same time. So we only want to assess 1 mode at a time. The other kind of question that we won't be able to include is the text message question. So again, on previous exams, we had a longer reading passage where students would read a text message exchange in the target language. And the reason that we would have to get rid of this one is it's just very, very difficult to find authentic examples of text messages that would be at the level and meet the requirements for the questions that we are creating.
Okay.
All right, so as I mentioned before, we do have to follow a certain weight percentage guides that were released by the state. So if you look on the left-hand side, you can see what the guidelines put out by the state say. We must have 40% interpretive communication, 30% interpersonal communication, and 30% presentational communication. There is a little bit of choice involved here. So if you look under interpretive communication, interpretive reading can account for 20 to 25% of the exam, and interpretive listening can be 15 to 20% of the exam. And if you look over to presentational communication, presentational writing can be 15 to 30%, and presentational speaking is optional. It can be 0 to 15% of the exam. On the right-hand side, you can see the format for the OHM BOCES Checkpoint A exam. If you look under interpretive communication, 40%, we've split it right down the middle. So interpretive reading is 20%, And interpretive listening is also 20%. Under presentational communication, we have opted to only assess presentational writing, and partially because we didn't want to add an extra 15 points onto speaking. We already had 30 points for speaking, and we didn't want to add a whole nother 15 points there. Okay, and the weight percentages for American Sign Language, there's not any choices here. So the guidelines state that interpretive communication, which we have interpretive receiving, is 50%. Interpersonal communication, which is interpersonal signing, is 20%. And presentational communication, presentational signing, is 20% as well. And then we have relating to standard 4, relating cultural practices and products to perspectives, which is 10%. And although we are in ASL, it's different than modern languages. There's a whole section related to standard 4 that is the culture. We do also embed the culture into the other sections of the exam as well. So the relating culture practices and products to perspectives is not the only part in the exam that you will see culture. You will see it in the other parts as well. And this does go for modern languages as well.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to do a description of our format for modern languages. And this is going to be presented by Lou. If you have your copy in front of you, it might be easier. This one, I'm going to pull it up and Lou will begin to talk about it. But you can see it's very extensive as far as width is concerned. This is the best that we were able to get it for you. So that is the reason why it's in the chat at this point in time, for you to download yourself. All right, Lou?
Okay, thank you, Lucille. I'd like you to look at the top part of the chart that we see here. And first thing I'd like to point out is Dana keeps referring to modern languages, and the state now has established that the classical languages do not fall into this, nor does ASL. So for us, for our BOCES, we're talking about our Chinese, our French, our Italian, and our Spanish exam. Okay, and as Dana said, pointed out to you that we must follow the state guide of interpersonal communication, interpretive, and presentational. We will follow the state guidelines for percentage of 30% for interpersonal, 40 for interpretive, and then 30 for presentational communication. At that point, we began to devise our own exam to outline it. So you will see here for interpersonal, the number of tasks will be 2. There will be an interview task and a role play task. For the interpretive communication, there will be 30 multiple choice questions. Okay, there will be part 2 will be our interpretive listening. That will have 15 questions. And then part 3, our interpretive reading, will have 15 questions. And then for presentational communication, there will be an email task, but as Dana explained, it will be a different email task than what our OHM BOCES previously had, and there will be one free response task. Then when I look to point values for the interpersonal, there will be 15 points for each task. For the interpretive communication, there will be a conversion chart provided to base the number of correct questions that the students respond to and the points they gain. That is not yet completed. It's worked on. We have not come to a consensus about that. And then presentational communication, again, There'll be 15 points for each task. As far as options go for the students, for the interpersonal communication for each of the tasks, students will randomly select 2 prompts. They'll review each of them, and then the student will choose one of the prompts to complete for each task. For the interpretive communication, there is no choice. And then for presentational communication, both Part 4A and Part B, students are given 2 prompts for each task, and they choose one to complete. So we are giving the students choice, a good amount of choice on this. For our task descriptions, okay, for interpersonal speaking, a prompt written in English is the stimulus for the task between the teacher and each student. For each task, students decide who initiates the conversation. And the conversation is in the target language. Again, students have the choice whether they want to initiate or whether they want the teacher to initiate. For Part 1A, the interview task, okay, the teachers participate as themselves, and students participate as themselves. So this is basically a conversation between teacher and student, just like you have all the time in your own classroom. For Part 1B, it's a role play. The teachers role play the person described in the prompt, and the students participate as themselves. This is, if you've been using our exam before, this is the traditional role play that we have seen before in previous exams. So the task format for both parts 1A, okay, and part 1B, okay, first of all, we want you to know that they represent a broad distribution of the themes and topics of the revised New York State World Language Standards. Dana addressed that. Dana told you about the change. These are based upon universally understood life experiences, providing a framework for the conversation. We decided that a student should be familiar with the situation, okay, in both the interview and the role play. So they should have an experience about which they can speak. For the task format, okay, continuing, okay, they represent a broad distribution also of the language functions, the exchange of information, the expressing of feelings, of preferences, and opinions. For Part 1A, for the interview task, annually, 26 original prompts are composed for the administration of each examination. 2 prompts per topic. Excuse me. And students and their teachers have a natural conversation based upon the topic addressed by the prompt. For Part 1B, the role play, annually, 16 original prompts are composed for the administration of each exam, 4 per each language function. Students and their teachers have a contrived conversation based upon a scenario. And when I say a contrived, this is what we are accustomed to, where we say you are in a target country, and you're talking perhaps at the train station, or you're talking to someone on the street and you need some information. The student never plays a contrived role. The student always plays himself or herself or themselves. Okay? And I think that's where I am there.
Okay, let me go to the next slide. I think, Lou, you've covered most of this, but if you would like to go through, I've got your slides coming up here.
Okay. Well,
Anything?
again, the interview is student friendly. I really like the interview because it's, as I said before, it's what we do every day with our students when we talk to them about what's happening. It's a conversation just based on this prompt. And, you can easily practice every day as you're going through the year because you're constantly using the different themes and subtopics of the themes. Okay. And it's not role play. Okay. Very good. We can move on. Okay. So we're going to, so here is an example. Okay. And it falls under communities and neighborhood for the entire. So my student picks this. I read this to my student. I say, we're going to talk about our favorite places where we live. In our conversation, you, the student, will describe your favorite place where you live, and you will find out about my favorite places where you live. I will say to my student, okay, do you understand the prompt? And then I will ask, who is going to start the conversation? We design these so that basically there are two aspects of the prompt so that it gives the student more opportunity to create responses or to help lead the direction of a conversation as to giving them a little encouragement and helping them to create. Okay. Our next. So, what is a role play? It's a familiar task. It's a conversation based on a prompt. It's role based. The teacher always plays the fictitious role, and the students participate as themselves. Again, they're based on the themes and topics, and they represent, again, the exchanging of information, the expressing of feelings, the preferences, and opinions. Okay, so an example of that is, okay, I am your nationality friend. You and I make plans to go to the beach. In our conversation, you will tell me about some of the activities that you do at the beach, and then you'll ask me about some of the activities that I do at the beach. Again, I ask my student, do you understand the prompt? I give my student the option and say, who is going to start the conversation? Is it you or is it I? Again, we see the two aspects of the prompt to again give kids more help and direction as to how they can help to sustain this conversation. Next.
Okay, at this point, we're going to move over to the interpretive communication that's located in the middle of this format. And it is by the state and by us at 40%. So there are 30 multiple choice questions. And if you do the math, you realize we need a conversion chart. So there will be a conversion chart for this, and it is provided to you. There will be, excuse me, on the interpretive side, part 2, listening, and part 3, reading. This is pretty much the same format as what we have done in the past. You're going to notice that you have options of presentation to the students, such as that the teacher either reads the passage to the student live, or they may play a video. a video that is been recorded by a heritage speaker in all of our different languages. You have interpretive reading, where the students read the passages themselves. They are in the form of infographics or the form of an advertisement or even just a very short little narrative. In the interpretive listening, so I'm on the last column here in the middle of interpretive communication. It says interpretive listening. Part 2A, B, and C are the parts that make up this particular section of the exam. In part 2A, there are 7 questions with the answers in English. In part 2B, there are 3 questions with the answers in the target language. And in part 2C, there are 5 questions, and the answers are picture-based. They are clip art pictures. And you've seen this before on our exams. When it comes to the interpretive reading, part 3A, we have 10 questions where the answers are in English, the questions and answers are in English, and then 5 questions where the answers are in the target language. So you're going to notice that this section is probably one that hasn't changed very much at all in comparison to the next. But there are some things that we need to think about when we think about reading, and that is there is a massive change, very large change. We are now working with authentic resources, and everybody is very nervous about authentic resources. What are they? An authentic resource, edited, non-simplified text. It could be a text in print, it could be an audio text, it could be a visual format. This is the definition of an authentic resource. The most important thing is that it has been created by a heritage speaker for heritage speakers, not for language learners. That's a big difference. So what happens is immediately in our minds, we're thinking, well, how are we going to handle this? What are we going to do? These kids don't know some of these words. So the state has said we may do the following, and that is called chunking. What is chunking? Chunking is a selection of the text that you wish to use that gives you enough information to answer the question that has been written for it. You are not permitted, and we are not permitted, to remove any difficult, we can remove difficult or non-important text. And I put the not as important text in quotation marks. How do we do that? We use 3 little dots, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute. We must keep the vocabulary that is in the text that was produced by the heritage speaker for heritage readers. We cannot use synonyms. That was one way of making the text a little more easy when we were creating examinations in the past. We can no longer do that. So chunking is the process of taking the whole and breaking it down into smaller bits, manageable pieces that the student is able to understand. The goal is to have it flow as best as possible. So here's an example of an English example right now. I will show you one target language example coming up. This tiny house, located in the outskirts of Paris, is one of the most beautiful homes because it is super well decorated. It seems new, even though the neighborhood is old. Nevertheless, I love the colors and the design. Now, as someone who's writing an exam question, I'm thinking, okay, outskirts. Checkpoint A students don't know that. Nevertheless, Checkpoint A students are probably not going to know that either. How am I going to handle this? So we chunked it. And we chunked those 3 1/4 lines down to 2 lines at this point. This tiny house is one of the most beautiful because it is super well decorated. It seems new. I love the colors and the design. So I've chunked it to the point where it still flows. It's easy for the student to understand, but the words that are going to be difficult or not as important to them have been extracted. So here's a French example. It simply mirrors the one I gave you in English. And you see that I have taken out the words that are in red, and I have replaced them with the 3 little dots. So when I read it in French as well, it has complete and total comprehension. The student is not going to be feeling disjointed that, wait, what's missing? All right, because what is there makes sense. And I think it will become the onus of the teachers to explain to the students what those 3 dots mean, so that every exam has got to have them if you're doing chunking. Otherwise, you must use the authentic resource as it was found. Okay, next I'm going to turn it over to Dana, who's going to talk about the presentational communication. Dana?
Okay, so for part 4, presentational writing, there are 2 parts in which we ask students to demonstrate their abilities using the language functions of describe, share information, or to give reasons. So we have part 4A, the email task. Students will compose an email that meets the requirements of the task and addresses the prompt. And we also have part 4B, the free response task, where students will compose a response that meets the requirements of the task and addresses the prompt. So looking a little bit more closely at the 2 of these, if we look at the email task, like I mentioned before, this is no longer a read to write task. It is simply a text-based prompt. Students will have the choice between 2 prompts for this section. So there will be 2 different email tasks that are presented to them, different email prompts on the test that are presented to them, and they choose the one that they like the best and compose an email. It will be accompanied by a picture, and as you'll see in a minute, we'll look at examples. It will have a list of bulleted suggestions that students can follow. For part 4B, the free response task, there are also 2 prompts for students to choose between. This time, one of those is a text-based prompt that is accompanied by a picture, and the other one is a picture-based prompt. And again, students will choose which one they would like to complete, and they will compose a response to this prompt. So we'll take a look at some of the examples. So this is an example of a part 4A email task prompt. Again, there will be 2 of these on the exam that students can choose between. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice that the language function is listed. So for this particular prompt, it is to share information. In the little box in the middle, we have some reminders to students on how they can earn full credit. So they need to address all parts of the prompt. They should write in complete sentences. They should organize their ideas, and they should use a variety of vocabulary. The task states that they should compose an email in the target language that appropriately addresses the prompt. And the prompt is that you are making plans for an upcoming visit with your friend who lives in country. Now on the exam, it will of course specify which country. We'll pick a country that the target language is spoken in. And it says to write an email to this friend about your trip, to share your ideas for the trip, and to ask your friend for ideas about the trip. So there are 2 different things that the student needs to accomplish. Underneath, you can see there are a bulleted list of suggestions. Students may use these suggestions, but they are not required to. We do suggest that you tell your students that, they are good suggestions. We put them there for a reason. If they follow along, they will do very well. And we also have a picture next to it that is related to the prompt, just to spark some ideas, let them really understand, okay, what is this prompt about? So that's an example of the first one. This is an example of a free response task. Now, remember, there are 2 different tasks or 2 different prompts that students can choose between for part 4B. One of them is a text-based prompt, and the other is a picture-based prompt, and I will show you that one shortly. They will choose which one they like, and they will compose a response in the target language that appropriately addresses the prompt. This prompt states that your target language class is going to video conference with the school in, it could be in, somewhere in Spain or in China, whatever language they're studying. And you're going to give a presentation in which you talk about yourself. Write the script of this presentation. Again, underneath, we have a list of bulleted suggestions for students to follow along. And we have a picture related to the prompt to spark some ideas and creativity with the students. Okay. And we have one more example of a prompt. Again, this is a free response task. So they would choose either this prompt with the picture or the previous one with the text-based prompt. This one is a little bit different. We have had picture prompts on the exams in the past, so these would be familiar. However, if you look at the task, it is slightly different than what we've had before. So in the target language, we are asking students to write a paragraph about the picture below that includes the main idea of the picture and observations that support the main idea. So we are not looking for purely description of the picture. We're not looking for there are two lights on the wall. We're looking more for what is the main idea? What is happening in the picture? The main idea is that a family is eating together. And then observations would be more specific information that a student can figure out from the picture. So it could be, where are they? Who is in the picture? When does this take place? Is it in the morning? Is it at night? Students are not required to write a narrative about the picture, although they may. And if you look at the bullets underneath, these are a little bit different than the previous tasks. They're very general. They're who, what, where, when type questions. Why is the scene happening? What feelings are expressed? Things of that nature. So it's a little bit different, and we will see as well that that's mirrored a little bit in the ASL exams that Lucille will be talking about momentarily as well.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to make a transition to the ASL exam and then again come back to the modern languages as well when we talk about the rubrics as well. So how is the ASL exam different from the modern languages exam? While I'm telling you this information, those of you who are ASL teachers and wish to follow more closely, you should try to download your copy of the Checkpoint A exam for ASL at this point in time. And one of the things that I want to explain to all the teachers of modern languages is that there are very similar parts of the exam. It is something that we have strived very hard to do. We have two exams that OHM BOCES produces, Chinese and ASL, that are Category 3 exams. That makes them a little harder to learn, and we have to adjust accordingly. So at this point, I'm going to start with the ASL, and you're going to notice that this is very small. All right. I put it onto two screens for you, hoping that I'm going to just show you. There's the bottom half and here's the top half. So what is different? And look at the amount of interpretive communication. 50% of the ASL exam is in the interpretive communication mode. For those of you who are not acquainted with ASL, there are two primary ways of conversing or signing. One is receptive, in the sense of receiving information from the opposite signer, and the other is expressive, in the sense of giving out information by you signing back to the other people or person with whom you're having the conversation. So the interpersonal communication is the expressive, The presentational communication is expressive. The interpretive communication is the receptive coming in, but they have one part here that is different from modern languages, and that is that they have a section worth 10% on relating cultural practices and products to perspectives. Dana did talk to you about modern languages, telling you that in the modern languages, we have embedded cultural questions throughout the exam. We don't just have one section on culture, but on the ASL exam, we embed culture throughout the whole exam, but the state also wanted us to have relating the cultural products or practices and products to the perspectives as a separate entity, a separate part of the exam. So I'm going to go through it now. On the second line, there are still 2 tasks. In modern languages, people, you're going to notice these are the same tasks we have in modern languages. There is one interview task and there is one role play task. This is identical to modern language. In the presentational communication, right in here, I have 2 picture observations. These picture observations, as you're going to see in my examples, actually match the presentational communication on the modern languages. Then we have the interpretive. The interpretive has 25 questions to it, right here, 25 questions. And then there's one cultural comparison question. And I have an example of that as well. So as far as points are concerned, I have 2 interpersonal tasks, each worth 10 points. Presentational communication is there are 2 picture observation tasks, and they are worth 10 points each for a total of 20 points. So you're seeing the math coming out. 2 tasks, 10 points each, 20%. 2 tasks, 20%. Here we have a total of 25 questions. Makes sense, okay? 2 points per multiple choice question. 10 points for the summary. I'm going to explain the summary as I get to part 3D, all right? And then 10 points for the cultural comparison. So right now, there is a choice, just like there is in the interpersonal communication for modern languages. Student gets to choose 2 prompts, choose the one he or she likes. Same thing is true in the presentational communication. There are 2 pictures. The student chooses 2, picks the one that they feel that they can do the best on. So that 2 mirrors identically to the modern languages. Everything that is here is exactly the same as it is for the modern languages. There is no difference whatsoever. So I'm going to go over to the pictures. There is one change here for anyone who has used our ASL exam in the past. And this is that, yes, you have the choice, but the task is now to sign the main idea of the picture and to sign the observations. That's exactly what modern languages are doing, but they're doing it in the writing format as opposed to the presentational communication here. So this is definitely signing, whereas in the modern languages, it is in writing. Under the interpretive communication, there are passages that the teacher can read, or that you may use one of our heritage speakers who records a video for you as well. Nothing has changed in that section. So now in the section relating to the cultural practices, there are going to be 2 stimuli, 2 pictures as they relate to deaf culture. The task is to compose a written response in English or in the student's native language. And that is a comparison of the 2 pictures, picture 1, picture 2. So what happens is they're going to identify one similarity. Then they're going to explain how that similarity shows a common aspect of the deaf culture. Then they're going to outline one difference between the 2 pictures and how that relates to deaf culture. I'm going under 1A right here, annually. I'm not going to read all of this to you because I know that you have it. I just want to make some comparisons. We have annually 26 original prompts that are given to you in the form of a card. There are 2 prompts per topic, which I am referring are the topics from New York State of our themes and topics. So there are 13 topics under our 3 themes for checkpoint A. Under the role play, there are 16 original prompts because we are working here with the language functions, and the language functions are exchanging information, expressing feelings, preferences, and opinions. So you have 4 that are language functions. 4 times 4, 16. So we have 16 prompts from which the student may choose. In the presentational speaking, there are 10 original picture prompts. That is the same number that this section has always had. There is no change there. And they are always based upon universal life experiences that most teenagers or young students would know. Then we get to the interpretive receiving. In the interpretive receiving, there are 4 parts to this section. This is the section that is worth 50% of the exam. There will be 5 passages that are signed with 2 English questions for a total of 10 questions. So 5 passages, 2 questions, 2 English questions per passage for a total of 10. Part 3B is signed. That's the difference between A and B. The second difference between A and B is that in Part B, they are single questions with only one signed question. Part 3C looks very similar to what we have had with modern languages. They are a question and a picture answer. Pictures are always in clip art. The part that is unique to ASL is Part 3D. It is a structured response summary. So the student is going to receive a narrative that is signed. It's a short narrative. And it is, when I say short, I don't mean 2 lines. It's a longer length. It's probably maybe 10 lines at most. And it is a story. And that the students then must summarize what they have seen signed to them. So there is nothing else in print. They only see the signing and they must write the summary. And that summary must identify the main idea. It must identify the main characters. It must identify important details, and it must identify the central issue. So the main idea is a sentence that summarizes the whole story altogether. But the central issue is something that needs to be resolved. For example, there's a problem in the story. How does that get resolved? And that is what the student needs to be trained to do. So these are different things from before. This is only going to be the second iteration of this style of question for Part 3D. And then for the cultural practices, I'm just going to show you the example that's coming up. So here's the prompt, and I think you're going to see this and you're going to say to yourselves, I've seen this before. Yes, they are the same prompt. Modern languages and ASL have the same prompt. We are going to sign, the wording is changed to accommodate the language. We are going to sign about our favorite places, where we live. In our conversation, you will describe your favorite places where you live. Find out about my favorite place or places where I live. Do you understand the prompt? And who's going to start the conversation? You or me? And the student will simply tell us. One thing that you may have noticed is this little gray square. And what that is doing is telling you the topic. And then this gray circle here is the interview. So when you have a card, you're not going to be confused. It's definitely going to tell you what task it is. The next one is a role play. Again, it's identical. I am your deaf friend. You can see the difference. We've made a change to incorporate the word deaf as opposed to I am just your friend. You and I make plans to go to the beach. In our conversation, you will tell me about some activities that you do at the beach. Ask me about some of the activities that I do at the beach. Do you understand the prompt? Who's going to begin, you or me? Presentational signing. Presentational signing is a description of an authentic image. It's picture-based, as I explained that to you, and you have the original prompts. You need to sign the main idea of that picture with a supporting observation. So here's an example. So in ASL, sign about this picture, including the main idea and observations that support the main idea. All right, what is happening in this picture? That's my main idea. But once again, as Dana already explained to you, we have the who, what, where, when, why here to assist the student. And in thus doing, the student is more than likely going to score well, depending upon their abilities in the actual language. All right, so again, you see this little black button here that says describe. That is one of the functions of this particular task. And now we're going to introduce our rubrics. So we're going to go from good, better, best, all right, as far as our rubrics are concerned. All of our rubrics are in draft form. So at this point, Lou is going to talk to you about the interpersonal speaking, I believe it is, Lou, at this point in time. Lou?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
the
I'm sorry.
interpersonal speaking. That's okay, no problem. I should tell you that probably one of the biggest changes in our exam has to do with the interpersonal speaking. We want you to know that the interpersonal speaking, we've lost certain criteria such as the number of utterances, first and second attempts, etc. Instead, our interpersonal speaking for modern languages is a very holistic approach to the conversation and also a holistic approach to scoring the student. So the first thing we see here under directions is that the scorer evaluates each dimension of the rubric holistically based on the entirety of the conversation. Another important aspect is only a score of 6, 4, 2, or 0 may be assigned for the completion of the task. If a student earns any points for the completion of the task, a 6, a 4, or a 2, then you go on to evaluate the rest of the rubric here. So you'll see that there's a little division in a little gray area there underneath completion of task. And these are based on the novice high, novice mid, novice low, or non-communicative aspects. The very first dimension, and these dimensions are taken, and these are the guidelines from the state of what our dimensions of a rubric should be. And all during the year, as you're working with your students orally, you should consider these dimensions. The first is the completion of task. How well does the student fulfill the purpose for communication? Okay. You'll notice 6, 4, 2 points, where the rest of it is 3, 2, 1. We have decided that it is very important that the student meets the completion of the task, so it's double point for this aspect of the rubric. So when I look to the novice high, I say the student completes the task by clearly maintaining and advancing the conversation using the targeted language function, completing both requirements of the chosen prompt, and including ideas and questions that are predominantly related to the prompt. Now it looks so simple, but I will tell you that we spent hours and hours working on various drafts of this rubric. And right now we like our draft, but again, we're calling it a draft because we want input from those of you who use our tests or are going to use our tests. So we will very quickly after this webinar, very quickly we will come to a decision and finalize the rubric. So I look there to my novice high. Now I move down and I'm going to see what's different. Now for the novice mid, I say mostly completes the task by somewhat maintaining. So you'll see that I've got my adverbs or adjectives that are going to change from completes to mostly completes, from clearly maintaining to somewhat maintaining. Using the target language function, partially completing both requirements of the prompt. And you remember our prompt card clearly shows two different directions for the student to go to. And then when I look to the novice low, I see that the student minimally completes the task, struggling to maintain and advancing, minimally completing one or both of the requirements, and including ideas and questions that are marginally related. And then there's a 0. And the 0 says the student is unable to initiate or maintain a conversation that is related. So once I score and give my student a 6, a 4, or 2, then I can go on to score the other dimensions. My dimensions now go to expression and understanding, comprehensibility and control of language, and discourse and vocabulary. So those are the points I'm going to be training my students and that I'm going to be evaluating my students on throughout the year once we start practicing these conversations or the scenarios. Okay, I'm going to look to expression and understanding, and I see that the student predominantly responds and reacts appropriately to the conversation partner, sometimes expressing original ideas. And we put a bullet here to say this includes initiating the conversation if the student elects to do so. The student may need minimal repetition. Again, like any rubric, we're not looking for perfection. So minimal repetition. Moving down, we see that the student sometimes responds and reacts. Okay, the student needs frequent repetition and or rephrasing, or the student struggles to respond and react. And the student needs continual repetition and or rephrasing from the teacher. For comprehensibility and control of language, I see that the student can be understood by someone who is used to communicating with novice language learners. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Errors, including pronunciation, do not interfere with overall comprehensibility. For the novice mid, the student can be somewhat understood, and errors, including pronunciation, interfere with overall comprehensibility. And then when I look to the novice low, the student can be minimally understood, and errors, including pronunciation, impede. For discourse and vocabulary, I look and it says the student predominantly uses simple sentences, including a variety of vocabulary and common expressions appropriate to the conversation. Whereas for my novice mid, it moves me to use single words and short phrases. Okay. And when I look to the novice low, uses single words and short phrases, predominantly repeating teacher's vocabulary and introducing few common expressions appropriate. Okay. Again, we mark this holistically. We consider how long the student speaks and maintains the conversation, and that determines how we score. We do not score by individual responses, and there is no specific number of how many responses the student has. There will be directions in our manual to better instruct you how to perform these tasks than what I've just done and presented to you.
Next, I have Dana, who's going to explain the next rubric for modern languages, and that's the presentational writing. Dana?
Okay, so you might notice that the format of this rubric is very similar to the one that Lou just presented. So we have, again, a set of 4 dimensions, and these are scored at the novice high, novice mid, and novice low level. Again, we have completion of the task being the most important dimension on the rubric, which can be assigned 6, 4, or 2 points, or 0 if the student does not accomplish the task. If they do not have anything that is related to the prompt, if everything they write is off topic, then they would be assigned a 0, just like for the interpersonal speaking. So if we look at completion of the task, very similar language. So the student's response completes the task by using the targeted language function and clearly addresses the prompt. So if you move down to the novice mid, they mostly complete the task and somewhat address the prompt. Novice low, the response minimally completes the task and only marginally addresses the prompt. Again, for the 0, the non-communicative, the student's response is entirely unrelated to the prompt. If this is the case, you would assign the student a 0 and you would stop grading the task. If a student, however, scores at least at a novice low, 2 points, then you can move on to the other dimensions. And you notice a lot of overlap in between these and the ones that we saw in the other rubric. So we do have comprehensibility and control of language again, and we have discourse and vocabulary. What's different is that we do not have the expression and understanding because they're not responding to anybody. This is presentational. So we have a dimension that is organization. So looking at comprehensibility and control of language, the student's response, now this is at novice high, the student's response can be understood by someone who is used to communicating with novice language learners. Errors do not interfere with overall comprehensibility. Now, of course, as the previous rubric, we're going to be scoring each dimension holistically. So we're talking about the overall comprehensibility. There might be maybe one minor thing, but overall, errors do not interfere. You can understand what the student is saying. At the novice mid, the student's response can somewhat be understood. And the big difference here is that errors do interfere with the overall comprehensibility of the response. At novice low, the response is minimally understood, and the errors impede the comprehensibility. They really force interpretation. There's a lot of guesswork going on at this point. I think this is what the student means. I'm pretty sure, but you really have to kind of, you're being a little generous, okay? discourse and vocabulary is the next dimension. For the novice high, the student's response is predominantly composed of simple sentences that contain a variety of nouns, verbs, and common expressions. If you take a look at the novice mid, this time it's predominantly single words and phrases. So they might have a sentence in there, but if you look at the response as a whole, it is mostly single words, short phrases. There is a limited variety of vocabulary. At the novice low, the response is almost entirely single words and short phrases, and it has little or no variety of the expressions used. So they might be repeating the same words over and over again. I like this, my mom likes this, I don't like this. The same kinds of sentences, the same nouns, the same verbs repeated. The dimension that is different is organization. So for the novice high, the student's response demonstrates general organization of ideas by sequencing, grouping of ideas, using expressions of time and/or including other basic transition words. So these are going to be words like and, but, because, words that are very commonly taught at the checkpoint A level. Under novice mid, the student will have some organization. You're not seeing a lot, but you see a little bit. And then under novice low, you have minimal organization of ideas. And there's a variety of ways that students can do this. We listed quite a few of them here, but they can group ideas together. They don't hop around from topic to topic. It's got a general flow and organization to the paragraph. One thing you might notice is that we do not have a word count anymore. And this is, so you have to remind students, like, could they potentially complete the task with one sentence? Sure, maybe, but are they going to have enough vocabulary and organization if they do that? No. So they're going to want to write a paragraph. We're just not specifying exactly how many words or characters with Chinese that they would need to write to do this.
Move on to the next, which is the interpersonal signing. And this is now for the ASL. And I think what you're going to notice here is an even greater similarity in the rubrics to what the modern languages are. That was intentional, excuse me, on our part to try and keep them as close as we could. But here you're going to see some terminology that is exclusive to ASL. And one of those things is called the parameters of ASL, such as hand shape, gesture, the palm, is it up, is it down? All of these things in ASL make a big difference in the way the sign is conveyed and received in a conversation. So the same holds true for both rubrics that I'm going to present to you, the interpersonal signing as well as the presentational signing, in the sense that the whole top part of the completion of the task is the same. The wording is basically the same as well. So I'm just going to highlight the words. I don't feel a need to read to you everything that's in there because you've heard it twice now. So I'm going to give you the comparison words and you can see how close they are related. So I'm going to read from my form at this point for you. The student clearly maintains and advances the conversation, completes both requirements of the chosen prompt, includes new ideas and questions, predominantly, there's the word again, predominantly related to the prompt. For the novice mid, going across the screen, the student mostly completes the task by somewhat maintaining and advancing, partially completing both requirements, or completing only one requirement, and then somewhat relates everything to the prompt. Again, across the screen for the novice low, the student minimally completes Struggling to maintain. We really liked that word. That word, I think, is very descriptive for teachers to look at and say, I understand struggles, all right? Struggling when this, you can tell when a student is struggling to get the words out or the sign made, all right? Then struggling to maintain and advance the conversation, minimally completing one or both of the requirements, and marginally related to the prompt. And the non-communicative, unable to initiate and maintain a conversation. Thing is advancing because you haven't done it to begin with, okay? So then the same is true. You have that gray line in the center. Nothing else can be scored if the top box for completion of task is checked as 0. If that is a 0, the student has not completed the task, you grade nothing else. Okay, so expression and understanding, comprehensibility and language control, and discourse and vocabulary. If you look on the left-hand side of your modern languages, you're going to find the same dimensions. So going across for expression, predominantly responds, sometimes expresses original ideas, may need minimal repetition and or re-signing from the teacher. Novice mid, sometimes responds, needs frequent repetition or rephrasing. Struggles to respond, needs continual repetition and or rephrasing. Comprehensibility, there's one part here, everything else is the same as you're going to see on the other rubrics. You can see where it says errors, including those related to the parameters of ASL. There are certain errors that are critical in ASL that do not appear in the other languages, okay? So we wanted to make sure that you understand that those errors in the parameters, they do not interfere with the overall comprehensibility. And then in the novice mid, they do interfere. And in the novice low, they actually impede the comprehensibility. So the difference between interfere, there's a few little roadblocks, but I can get through them. Where impede, I'm at a dead stop. I can't do anything with that. All right, discourse and vocabulary. Predominantly uses simple sentences and minimally finger spells. There's another ASL word that is now in this rubric that is not in the others. Novice mid predominantly uses single signs and short phrases. So that's the same from the modern languages. You're moving from a full sentence to words or phrases. And then the student finger spells some words because they can't remember it. So they're going to remember this is their words are in English. So they're going to finger spell in those words that they don't remember how to sign. And then the students uses single signs or short phrases, predominantly features words. We felt that was critical. We felt that that was low. They were definitely, that's a crutch that they were depending on is, I'm going to spit back at you what you gave to me, all right? So something that even on the other rubrics in the past, we frowned upon as well. And then the student often finger spells words, including very basic, uncommon, and advanced vocabulary, okay? He has to finger spell everything, not just the uncommon ones. In the presentational signing, I'm going to highlight the words for you. Going across the top on the completion of the task, clearly describes the prompt using many suggested bullets. Partially describes, marginally describes, and then at the very top, completes the task, mostly completes, minimally completes, or does not complete. Those are the same. So one of the things that we'd like to convey to you is that ASL has the same tasks, the same concerns that every language has. Comprehensibility and control of language. Primary that I want to convey, errors do not interfere with overall comprehensibility. Errors interfere, errors impede. So that do not interfere, impede, interfere and then impede. And then in the discourse and vocabulary, simple sentences that contain a variety of nouns, verbs, and common expressions. We're looking for nouns, we're looking for verbs. We want a sentence that is going to come out as a coherent sentence. Limited vocabulary, little to no vocabulary. Organization, that's that new dimension that we have for presentational. Generally organized, using a proper use of time, sequencing, and other basic transition words that are very important in ASL. Somewhat organized, minimally organized, negligible, or single use. We'll go now to our question and answering, and I'm going to go directly to Roger. Roger, if you can unmute yourself and then share with us the questions that you have at this point. Any one of us and the other panelists, if you would unmute as well, so that anybody who wishes to answer can answer these questions. Roger?
Hi, Lucille. I've got 4 questions on the docket here. The
Okay.
first one is, are there any sample papers that are available for calibration? It sounds like they're looking for maybe an anchor paper or something.
Right, no, I do understand. We are in the process of gathering marker papers as we speak. We have teachers in OHM BOCES consortium who have volunteered to give us papers from their students and audio from their students. And we are then going to take them. We'll be grading them. The teachers did not. We felt that that was not something we wanted to burden them with. We will be grading them and we will be presenting them at, for OHM, we will be presenting them at our first Superintendent's Conference Day, which is scheduled for October 11th. For the remaining participants here, if you are interested in marker papers, we can perhaps arrange through Mr. Smith something of another presentation where we can review those with you. But yes, we will have marker papers. We don't have them today. Okay?
Okay.
Next question.
Next question. For the part 4 picture, are you saying that instead of describing the picture, they needed to create a story? Is that correct?
Okay.
Not really. Not really.
No.
Okay. What Dana explained was that in the writing, the student has to give the intent of the picture and then give details, but it is not checkpoint B where they're to relate a story. Okay, Dana, you agree with that?
Yeah, they can make a story up if they would like to, but they are not required to.
Right. Remember, this is checkpoint A level.
Right. That is the primary difference between checkpoint A and checkpoint B. Checkpoint B is definitely a story. Checkpoint A is, it's their option to do it, but it's not mandatory.
Next question.
All right. The next question is on language functions. Looking at the examples of the writing that you have given, where does it talk about a targeted language function, that's in quotes, targeted language function, that's in the rubric?
It's in the rubric.
I can chime in on that one. So when you
Okay,
look
go
at
ahead.
the prompts for part 4 writing, up in the top right-hand corner of the prompt indicates which language function is being targeted by that prompt. It's a little black box, and so it'll say things like describe or express feelings, persuasion, etc., up in that top right-hand corner of the prompt. So when the rubric refers to the targeted language function, that's embedded within the prompt and identified within it.
So in other words, if a student is to try to persuade at the end of the conversation holistically, you have to determine, did the student accomplish that function of persuasion?
All right, you ready for the next question?
Sure.
Okay, it says, so based on the rubrics, no matter how many errors a student has, as long as you can understand it, they receive full credit?
Again, holistically, the student, you look at the sample of what the student gives, and some students are going to give much more language than others. So we're not doing anything about counting errors or saying what errors. Remember, it's your job as the teacher to recognize what is checkpoint A. Errors beyond checkpoint A don't matter. But if there is comprehensibility for someone who is used to dealing with a student at this level, with a speaker at this level, a heritage speaker who's familiar with speakers at this level and still can get comprehensibility, then errors, that horrible word that we used to say, grammatical errors, they don't matter.
I know as veteran teachers, many of us have issue with that because we learned so differently. Um, Grammar was exceptionally important, and the movement now is the holistic grading. So that's what we need to adjust to as we go through this. So I think Lou answered it spot on in that we have to, as teachers, we have to make a judgment call. Is this checkpoint A? And if it is, great. If it isn't, then it needs to be marked down on the rubric. So it's not something that where you want to say to yourself, okay, they've made a ton of errors, but I can still give them full credit for that. I don't think we're saying that. We're trying to say that you need to assess the kind of errors that they've made.
I'm going to just chime in one extra thing on that to clarify that the response that they provide is associated, that's what you're going to score. Using your knowledge of the student performance or your student's performance coming into the exam is helpful for you to calibrate what checkpoint A is, but you're only scoring the response they provide on the test.
Yes, Greg, good point.
All right, I have a couple of questions that have just kind of slid in the last few moments.
Okay.
Good,
The first one
good.
is about ASL. It says, since ASL is a level 3 language, how many years should a student take ASL before they take the checkpoint A, in your opinion?
Well, the status has been pretty clear that the checkpoint A should be given after the 2 years of study, particularly for ASL. ASL is, like Chinese, a level 3-4 category, and we can't force districts to hold a 2-year course for them. We do have some districts that teach ASL in 1 year and they still take the exam. Naturally, their scores will probably not meet the scores of students who have had a 2-year exposure, which is what the state recommends. So
Okay.
part of the question was, in my opinion, I do feel that 2 years is advantageous to the student.
And I'll just chime in one extra thing on that. When ASL was changed to a category 3 language, that was the state essentially saying more practice time is needed for students to perform at the level that they would be performing in the other languages. So if your district was only giving a 1-year course in preparation for checkpoint A, then I think that's a direct statement from the state that 2, or if not 3, would be needed to prepare for it.
Mhm.
But I agree with Lucille, 2 seems to me to be a sweet spot.
All right, and the last question we have that slid in is, for the speaking tasks, why do the prompts have host, mother, father, and nationality included in the prompt?
Okay, go ahead, Lou.
Okay, because those are contrived situations. Okay, those are scenarios. And we're saying that the student, become an exchange student. So therefore you're in a home where you probably have either a host mother or host father, also depending on the gender of the teacher. So uh, it's a, and in every situation, there has to be a reason why my students are speaking Chinese or why my students are speaking French. Because otherwise it would be, why can't I answer this in English? So we're saying you're with a host mother or father and you're trying to carry on a conversation in their language where you are the exchange student studying in France, studying in China, or
Right.
or
And when that
talking to your Spanish speaking neighbor.
And when that prompt is read aloud to the student, you wouldn't say the parentheses nationality, you would actually put in whatever language it is that the student is testing in. So if it was French, for example, you would say your French host mother, if the teacher was a female. And that tells the student, okay, I have to talk in French. I can't talk in English. Because if you've had some students like I have had in the past who are very bright students and they'll say, well, I don't see where it says I have to do that. All right. And we want to prevent that. But that's our reasoning.
The last comment that I have is, will Zoom be available at the October 11th Superintendent's Day?
I don't have a definitive answer on that at this point in time. I can only tell you that it will be posted as to whether or not it will be. As of
I'm
the
sure.
moment,
That's it.
as of the moment, it is not Zoom ready.
Okay.
But you know what? I'm sure Greg is great as far as making sure that everybody who uses our exam is well informed of what we're doing. So I'm sure that whether it's there may be another webinar, and if we don't do our superintendent's day.
Yes, at our superintendent's conference day, we will be using those marker papers, and I know some of you are interested in that. So if you are not part of OHM BOCES, BOCES Consortium, please do reach out to Greg, and we can certainly work out something where we can get that to you as well.
We will
And that's all
certainly,
I have.
we will certainly put something out regarding either the distribution of content from that day or information about hosting a webinar, should we do that. But certainly something will come out from us, and please check your email for that information when the time comes. So it should be sometime in the next month or so. You'll definitely hear from us.
Okay, Roger, any more?
Oh, and one last one just came in. Is there going to be a recording available of this PD?
There certainly is. On our website, I put a link to this in our chat already. So if you haven't seen the chat, please take a look. But on our website, which is oneida-boces.org/world languages, you'll notice there's a page on the left-hand side called Professional Development. And shortly, in the next few days or so, we'll make sure that this webinar is posted, a recording of it, as well as the materials associated.
Okay. Well, Roger, if there's no more questions, then on behalf of OHM BOCES, I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon. We hope we were able to present some material that is valuable to you, and any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to go back actually to our email addresses, if you just give me 1 second. And let me
And I do know that a lot of people have started leaving, but we do have a feedback form.
oh, thank you, Dana, I
Fill out.
forgot.
But we can probably, Greg, would we be able to send that out in email as well? Okay, I'll pop
Perfect.
it into the chat now so that if people want to, but we'll also send it in the email.
Okay, very good. There are our addresses, email addresses, if anybody wants to contact one of us. And our director is Greg Smith.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Thank you to our panelists and to Roger for handling the Q&A. Hopefully this information was beneficial to you all, and you'll definitely be hearing more from us in the upcoming weeks or so. Again, thanks for coming.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye
Thank you.
now.
Buenas noches.